لم أسمع لدولة احتلال تدعي أنها ضحية كما تفعل إسرائيل. هكذا أنها محمود ضيف الله الحمود كلمته التي ألقاها نيابة عن المجموعة العربية في الجلسة الطارئة لمجلس الأمن الدولي التي انعقدت في 30 من أكتوبر الماضي. تلك الجلسة التي كرست للوقوف على الوضع في الشرق الأوسط بما في ذلك القضية الفلسطينية ولبحث التصعيد على الأرض الفلسطينية المحتلة وإسرائيل وللاستماع إلى إحاطات من مسؤولين في الأمم المتحدة حول الوضع الراهن. جلعاد أردان السفير الإسرائيلي لدى الأمم المتحدة الذي قال إن حماس هم نازيو العصر الحديث، وذكر أن حماس لا تسعى لحل الصراع أو تهتم بالحوار لأن الحل الوحيد بالنسبة لها هو إبادة الشعب اليهودي، وقال إن إسماعيل هنية ليس هو من يقود أيديولوجية الإبادة هذه، لأن هذا الدور يقوم به المرشد الأعلى لإيران آية الله خامنئي حسب تعبيره. وانتقد السفير الإسرائيلي مجلس الأمن الدولي لعدم إدانة حماس بسبب القتل المتعمد لمدنيين إسرائيليين، متحدثا عن تاريخ أسرته وإرسال جده وعائلته إلى معسكر أوشفيتز ومقتل عدد منهم في غرف الغاز في عصر ألمانيا النازية، وقال إن العالم وقف صامتا آنذاك، واتهم مجلس الأمن بالصمت مرة أخرى اليوم في وجه الجرائم المرتكبة ضد المدنيين الإسرائيليين. ونهض السفير الإسرائيلي من مقعده أثناء إلقاء كلمته واضعا نجمة صفراء على بدلته مكتوب عليها لن يتكرر مرة أخرى أبدا، في إشارة إلى المحرقة الهولوكوست التي تعرض لها اليهود أثناء الحكم النازي. وقال إنه أعضاء بعثة بلاده لدى الأمم المتحدة سيواصلون ارتداء هذه النجمة الصفراء حتى يدين مجلس الأمن الفظائع التي ارتكبتها حماس ويطالب بالإفراج الفوري عن الرهائن. يذكر بأن اليهود إبان النازية كانوا يجبرون على ارتداء شارة لتمييزهم دون غيرهم تمهيدا لارتكاب الانتهاكات ضدهم. وقال السفير الإسرائيلي إن الفرق بين اليهود عام 1939 واليوم هو أن لديهم الآن دولة وجيشا قويين، وأنهم سيدافعون عن أنفسهم ضد من يسعى لإبادتهم. واتهم حماس بالعمل داخل وتحت المستشفيات بما في ذلك مستشفى الشفاء الذي قال إنه يضم مركز قيادة حماس، وأن العملية الإسرائيلية في غزة ليست ردا على هجمات 7 من أكتوبر لكنها عملية دفاع عن النفس لضمان المستقبل لإسرائيل.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished Council members, my grandfather, Chaim, was a farmer. He lived in a small village in Transylvania with his wife Bracha and their 8 beautiful children. But in the spring of 1944, the small village ceased to exist. Their community was erased. The Nazis forced Chaim, Bracha, and their children, 8 children, onto cattle cars hurtling towards Auschwitz. Upon arrival, Bracha and 7 of their children, Pearl, Tzvi, Sarah, Hodaya, Leah, Henya, and little baby Mordechai, were murdered in the gas chambers and turned to ash. My grandfather's story was once a horror story of a different era, of a distant time of unfathomable hatred, a time which, until 3 weeks ago, we referred to as never again. Yet, never again happened again. The villages in southern Israel that were invaded by Hamas terrorists were peaceful agricultural villages, just like my grandfather's village in Transylvania. Entire communities were exterminated. Only this time, the murderers were Hamas Nazis. Entire Israeli families were turned into smoke and ash, no different than the fate that my grandfather's family met in Auschwitz. But the brutality of the crimes is not the only thing that the savage Hamas Nazis share with the German Nazis. They both share a common ideology, and it's not the two-state solution. The Einsatzgruppen Nazi death squads were committed to exterminating the Jews, just as the Nukhba Hamas terrorists are committed to exterminating the Jews and Israel. The Nazis sought a Judenrein, Jew-free Europe, just as Hamas seeks a Judenrein Israel. Hamas are modern-day Nazis. From their appalling inhumane violence to identical genocidal ideologies. Hamas is not seeking a solution to the conflict. They are not interested in dialogue. The only solution Hamas is interested in is the final solution, the annihilation of the Jewish people. And may I remind my colleague, they are the rulers of Gaza, not you. Yet Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, is no Adolf Hitler. He is not the Führer. He is not the leader of this genocidal death cult hell-bent on world domination. That role, dear colleagues, and you know it very well, is held by the supreme leader of Iran, the bloodthirsty Ayatollah Khamenei. Hitler's Third Reich was envisioned to be a 1,000-year empire stretching across continents, just as Khamenei envisions his radical Shiite hegemony to stretch across the region and beyond. The Ayatollah regime is the modern Nazi regime, and their death squads includes Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Revolutionary Guard, and other savage jihadists. Instead of shouting, Sieg Heil, these radical Nazi Islamists scream, death to Israel, death to America, death to England. You could see it on the Khamenei's Twitter account. Just like the Nazi regime, the Ayatollah regime sows death and destruction everywhere it touches. Just as the French under the Vichy or the Italian under Mussolini, the residents of Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen, and Syria are enduring indescribable bloodshed and terror at the hands of Iran's jihadist Nazi forces. Like the suffering of Londoners during the Blitzkrieg, Ukrainian civilians are being murdered from the skies with Iranian Nazi weaponry. Like the ever-reaching hand of the Wehrmacht, the Houthi Iranian proxy attacked Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, and Albania was struck by unprovoked Iranian cyber attacks. The Islamic Nazi regime of Iran is responsible for aiding terrorists around the globe and working towards destroying every value our civilized world holds dear. Today, the world is watching the rise of a Shia Islamist Reich. Yet, just like the rise of Nazism, the world is silent. Deafeningly silent. Even if you continue calling this meeting the situation in the Middle East and the Palestinian question for the rest of time, it will not make it any truer. This meeting is only about the situation in the Middle East and the Iranian threat. This has nothing to do with the Palestinians. 3 weeks ago, humanity witnessed Iran's Hamas death squads in action. Like Babi Yar, they exterminated Jews in the hundreds like they were insects. Hamas Nazis deliberately sliced open the pregnant belly of a woman, removed her fetus, and stabbed it before its mother's eyes while she was still alive. But even so, the Security Council still has not condemned Hamas for the intentional murder of Israeli civilians. Unbelievable. Over 250,000 innocent Israeli civilians have been displaced since the war began. Millions of Israelis are living every day under constant indiscriminate rocket fire, both in the south and the north, at the hands of Hamas, Hezbollah, and other jihadists. Does this council not have anything to say about this? Is this not also part of the situation in the Middle East? Council members, when my grandfather Chaim and his children were sent to Auschwitz, the world stayed silent. When his babies were sent to the gas chambers, the world stayed silent. When their bodies were burned along millions of other Jewish children, not only Jewish, the world was silent. Today, after innocent Jewish babies were burned alive, this council is still silent. Some member states have learned nothing in the past 80 years. Some of you have forgotten why this body was established. So I will remind you, from this day on, each time you look at me, you will remember what staying silent in the face of evil means. Just like my grandparents and the grandparents of millions of Jews, from now on, my team and I will wear yellow stars. We will wear this star until you condemn the atrocities of Hamas and demand the immediate release of our hostages. We walk with a yellow star as a symbol of pride, a reminder that we swore to fight back, to defend ourselves. Never again is now. Council members, in the face of the UN's silence, our enemies have become emboldened. They have seen the UN General Assembly applauding efforts to prevent the Jews from defending ourselves. They heard the Secretary General portray understanding for the Nazi slaughter. And this is precisely why we have seen the most staggering rise in Jew hatred since the Nuremberg laws and their aftermath. The anti-Semites have been empowered. They now know that slaughtering Jews in their beds is met with silence. They have been so galvanized by these organizations in action that they cannot wait to butcher Jews themselves. Calls for gassing the Jews are heard in Sydney. Chants for a Judenrein Palestine from the river to the sea can be heard from California to New York. Islamist battle cries against Jews are being screamed in London, Brussels, and Paris. An airport in Dagestan, Russia, was flooded yesterday by Islamist terror supporters who search for Jews to lynch. This is precisely where the world stood as the Nazis began their rampage. Precisely the same moment. And then, too, the world was silent. Understand where we are right now. Comprehend the weight of this moment. Internalize that the world stands at a crossroad just as it did in the 1930s. Would this council take the approach of Chamberlain, appease the Nazis and their sympathizers, or will this council take the approach of Churchill, to fight evil with blood, toil, tears, and sweat? Israel has made its choice. We were attacked by the Hamas Nazis. We were shown that genocidal Jew hatred did not die with Hitler. It bubbled and grew until it invaded our homeland. But the difference between 1939 and today is that today Jews have a strong state and a powerful military. We are not defenseless. We are lions of Judah, and we will defend ourselves against those that seek to annihilate us. In the days leading up to and following the October 7th massacre, Simchat Torah massacre, the Führer Khamenei continued to spread his poisonous genocidal ideologies with the world. He tweeted about the end of Israel. He said that whoever normalizes relations with Israel would lose. He claimed that Israel is dying, and on the day of the massacre, he called for the eradication of Israel alongside a video of Israelis running for their lives as his Hamas Einsatzgruppen mowed them down with machine guns. Colleagues, if Hitler had a Twitter account, it would look exactly the same as Khamenei's. Exactly. Shockingly, despite the blatant genocidal Nazism of the Islamic Reich of Iran, the Secretary General and UN officials, who are being applauded here, are still meeting with Iranian officials without saying one word of condemnation for their support of genocide. What a disgrace. the Secretary General rolled out the red carpet for the Iranian Nazi foreign minister here in this very building last week, smiling and shaking his blood-soaked hand. Secretary Gutierrez, aside from empty words paid as lip service for media purposes, has not publicly demanded even once that ISIS-Hamas terrorists allow the Red Cross to, at the very least, verify some sign of life of the hostages, to condition that without such a step, Hamas will be held accountable for the humanitarian situation in Gaza. How can this be? Why are the humanitarian needs of Gazans the sole issue? The sole issue you are all focused on. Is this not the bare minimum that must be called for from these monsters? Where is this council's voice as a council? Hamas Nazis have spent the past 16 years ruling Gaza. 16 years abusing Palestinians and butchering anyone who opposes them. When Hamas took power in Gaza in 2007, you all know it very well, they murdered hundreds of Palestinians with their own hands. They threw them off rooftops. They used Palestinians as human shields, building terror bases under hospitals and missile launchers next to schools. What do you expect us to do? They hoard medical supplies, food and fuel for themselves when these resources could benefit their people. I assume Lazzarini forgot to tell you about it. They also deleted the tweet that was telling you about it. Their leaders live in luxury in Doha and Istanbul. They don't even live in the Gaza Strip, their leaders, as their people live in poverty. Hamas ISIS terrorists are operating inside and under hospitals, including Shifa Hospital, which houses their command center. I reiterate it. Hamas is preventing Gazans from living an active war zone by heading south. Hamas is holding roughly 500,000 liters of fuel right now as we speak next to Rafah crossing. Everything can be checked. In any discussion about lack of fuel, your demands should be directed at Hamas. Israel has approved dozens of daily, more than dozens, of daily trucks of humanitarian supplies, including food, water, and medical equipment. But Israel refuses to supply the enemy, Hamas, with any aid, in accordance with international law. Hamas is the root cause of the situation in Gaza. Yet, you continue to insist on calling this meeting a discussion of the Palestinian question? Can anyone here provide a solution to the Palestinian question as long as Hamas controls Gaza? Calling for an immediate ceasefire is ultimately asking to tie Israel's hands and keep Hamas's rule in Gaza. Is this the future that you want for the people of Gaza? I'm sorry to say, but should this council have existed on June 6, 1944, it would be intensely debating how much electricity and fuel the citizens of Munich had as the Allies approached the shores of Normandy. This council would be fixated on debating the death toll of Germans versus British casualties. This council would be calling for a ceasefire before the Russians retook Stalingrad. We all know Hamas's intentions, and we all know that should they be given another chance, they will commit such atrocities again over and over and over, but this time on a much larger scale. Yet this organization, founded in the wake of the Holocaust, fails to act on its founding principles. Calling for a ceasefire is no different than calling off D-Day in 1944. Dear colleagues, Israel will no longer live with brutal Hamas Nazis on her border. We will not have savage ISIS-Hamas death squads invading our homeland again. Israel's operation in Gaza is not, I reiterate, is not a response to October 7th. It is an act of self-defense to ensure our future. Mr. President, the Israeli people are strong. We are unbreakable, and we are going nowhere. Many have tried to destroy us, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Romans, and the Nazis, to name just a few. But none have succeeded, and the Iranian Reich will be no different. Israel will prevail, God willing. We will bring our hostages home, and the citizens of the Jewish state will live in peace and freedom. Thank you, Mr. President.
أما السفير الروسي لدى الأمم المتحدة فاسرين بينزيا قال إن أولوية المجتمع الدولي الآن يجب أن تركز على وقف إراقة الدماء والحد من الضرر اللاحق بالمدنيين ونقل الوضع إلى المسار الدبلوماسي السياسي، مشددا على ضرورة تكريس الجهود الجماعية لإعادة إطلاق عملية التفاوض الكاملة بين الإسرائيليين والفلسطينيين بهدف تحقيق حل الدولتين المدعوم من الأمم المتحدة. واتهم ممثلي الدول الغربية في مجلس الأمن الدولي بازدواجية المعايير، مشيرا إلى أن مواقفهم تجاه أوكرانيا على الرغم من أن المدنيين في أوكرانيا لا يواجهون نفس قدر التهديدات التي يواجهها سكان غزة حسب تعبيره، وذكر أن بلاده تبذل جهودا مكثفة لتهدئة التصعيد لحل الصراع بشكل عاجل.